you for tuning into another episode of Teen Gen Talks podcast, where the goal is to empower the youth of Glendale and connect youth to community resources, individuals, and organizations through interviews and discussions. I'm your host, Melissa, and we also have Sarah helping out today. Today, we had the pleasure of talking to Xavier. Born and raised in Rio Grande Valley, Xavier is a prolific author, artist, and storyteller whose work focuses primarily on experiences growing up in the Rio Grande Valley. He is the author of 20 books, including Lucha Libre, The Man in the Silver Mask, and The Maximilian, and The Mystery of the Guardian Angel series, and so much more. Xavier lives with his family in San Antonio. Thank you so much, Xavier, for taking the time out of your day to talk with us. We have a lot to discuss.
I'm glad to be here. It's going to be fun. I love doing stuff like this and just, talking about my books and my art, and it's a lot of fun.
Thanks again. And to start off the interview, can you tell me a little bit about your passion for illustrating and storytelling and how that came to be?
Well, I grew up in a small border town called Rio Grande City. And one of the things that I grew up with is that my whole life I was surrounded by storytellers. My grandfather, my grandmother, my dad, some of my uncles. Never met my great-grandfather, but everybody told me he was a great storyteller. So I grew up my whole life just hearing people telling stories. And I tell people that really the only thing that I do different from them is, besides just telling the story, I also write it down. And which was a learning experience, just learning how to, it's one thing to tell a story, but then you have to go back in and write it and kind of work with it. And so that's really what I'm doing. But I also tell people, first and foremost, I'm a drawer, I'm a painter. My bachelor's, my master's degrees, they're all in art. But I always grew up just having this love of storytelling and writing. And I tell people that I'm lucky that I get to do things that I really love. I get to tell my stories, write them down, and make drawings that go with the stories. And in that sense, it's like it's just being basically a storyteller. And everything that I do is kind of aimed at telling a story. And the goal is especially with kids, my goal is when a kid reads a story, that he or she might say, you know what? His experience is not that different from mine. Because one thing I've learned is whether it's a grandfather, a dad, a mom, an aunt, a kid, your baby brother, there are some things that growing up Latino, we all kind of grew up with the same thing, like being introduced to La Llorona and all these different characters in popular Mexican folklore. And, and I tell people they're like gems. They're like precious stones that we pass them down like, okay, and everybody that gets that stone, they add to the story. They make it more contemporary. They make it more relatable. And to me, that's really, honestly, that's kind of like everything that I do. It kind of revolves around that idea of just telling a story and sharing it and passing it on.
Does writing stories based on your experiences or stories you have told make the writing and illustrating process more fun to you?
Well, it's fun because I tell people the fun thing about writing your own stories and illustrating them is, you have a lot of freedom. And I'm lucky that every publisher that I've had, like from with Arte Público Press out of Houston, Cinco Puntos Press, which is now Lee and Low, because I'm also working now with Lee and Low, because Cinco Puntos is now an imprint of Lee and Low, and they all have given me like total freedom when it comes to the stories and the illustrations. And I'll give you a real good example. I tell people it's one of my favorites. It's called Charro Claus and the Tejas Kid, the story of Santa's Mexican cousin, and like this is a very personal book because. Honestly, this story started off because I wanted to do a bedtime story for my little boy, who at the time was little. He's not little anymore. He's 18. He's graduating high school, getting ready to go to college. But, I wanted to do a bedtime story for him. And what happened is that when I was a kid, my dad introduced me to the concept of a Mexican Santa Claus because we were at a grocery store called Valley Mart. They were having a take your picture with Santa Claus Day, but Santa Claus was wearing a big charro hat. And I told Dad, that's not Santa Claus. He said, no, that's Pancho. That's his Mexican cousin. And I was like, Santa Claus is a Mexican cousin? And then Ms. Barrera introduced us to Lalo Guerrero and his song, Pancho Claus. And so one thing that was never there was an origin story. So I wrote Charro Claus as an introduction to my son, the bedtime story about this Mexican Santa Claus. And after I read him the story, I thought, you know what, this would be kind of cool. So I went and expanded on the story. I added my son to it, Vincent Ventura Garza. I added him to the story. And I tell people the cool thing about it is when you're doing the characters, when you're illustrating them, I made the character look like my son the way he did at the time, you know? And even Charro Claus, what I did with him is I made him kind of look like me, you know?
Wow, yeah.
And so it's like this whole idea of, and even in the back of the book, I wrote about the experience with my dad, and I put a picture of my little boy when he was little, modeling for the Tejas Kid. I tell people, when he was little, he loved telling everybody he was the Tejas Kid. Now he's 18. He's still like, "I dad, don't say that, don't say that." But once he gets older, and he has his own kids, he'll be proud. Like, "Oh yeah, that's me in the book," and they'll be like, "Yeah, right, Dad, whatever, right?" But that's the cool thing about like when you write the stories. A lot of the characters are based on people that I know, family, friends, people that I meet along the way, and it's a lot of fun. And a lot of the books are very personal, like like Maximilian and the Mystery of the Guardian Angel. That whole series of books. I grew up loving lucha libre, and so basically, I was able to recreate my childhood, but seen through the eyes of a character who sees his uncle, well, his great uncle, who he doesn't know is his uncle. Because I tell people, basically, it's Maximilian, the Mystery of the Guardian Angel is like a great big Mexican soap opera for young adults. I tell them, it's Maximilian loves lucha libre. His favorite wrestler is the Guardian Angel, the most famous masked wrestler in the world. But what he doesn't know, what nobody, not his mother, not his dad, nobody knows, is that the Guardian Angel is really his great uncle, who everybody believed died in a bar fight in Monterrey 37 years ago. But all this time, he's been living this secret life as the most famous masked wrestler in the world. And then one time, at one night, the worlds come crashing together. And the thing with Maximilian is he has an ideal of what the Guardian Angel is supposed to be. He's perfect. He always does the right thing. He's a symbol of justice. Now, his great uncle, with the man that wears the mask, is about as imperfect as you can get. And he wants his uncle to live up to this character that he created. And the whole message behind Maximilian, the Mystery of the Guardian, it doesn't matter how long you've been gone. Doesn't matter what happened. Family is family. And eventually everybody can come back to family. Or that's the concept of that whole series. It's all about the family in the story. And of course, Max wants to be the next Guardian Angel.
And how was your journey in the publishing industry? And what was something that you learned from that?
Well, with me, I tell people when people ask me about how to get a book published, and if they're aspiring writers, I tell them that the journey is different for everybody. Some people go through agents, some people get lucky and they get picked up like that. Other people, they have to plug away at it for years till they finally get their break. In my case, it took me 8 years to get my first book published. And I tell people, like I say, everybody's experience is different. Me, it was like, I knew storytelling was how I promoted my work. And so I did all the book festivals. All the, literary events. I did, the celebrations, anything that was going on where I got a chance to read, I would go and read. And really it was, and I did that for quite a few years. And that's what got me published, I tell people, because I was reading in Houston at the Latino Family Book Festival, which was put together by Tony Diaz. At the time, it was one of the largest Latino book festivals in Texas. And it just so happened that I was reading there one day, and Dr. Nicolás Canelos from Arte Público Press was there. He wasn't there to hear me. He was there to hear the person that was going to be there after me, because he was one of the writers. But after he heard me read, and I tell people it sounds really dramatic, but the whole conversation lasted like 5 minutes. We had a conversation, and I showed him some of my artwork, and I showed him some of my stories, and and we talked, and he gave me his card and said, call me Monday. And I talked to him on Monday, another like 5-minute conversation. And he said, send me the manuscript. And I sent it, she said, send it to me. I sent it to him directly. And then about 2 weeks later, I got a phone call, said, are you willing to work with an editor? And I said, yeah, I'll be glad to work with an editor. And that's how I got my foot in the door. And another book festival, I was at the Inter-American Book Festival in San Antonio. And that's where I met Bobby and Lee Bird, which led to me getting Lucha Libre, The Man in the Silver Mask, published with them, which is now with Lee and Low. And, so, well, to me, it was just, getting the work out there and making the connections. And that's how I was able. And then I told him, you know what, I tell people the story comes first. You got to have the story first. Now, once the story is done, then you try to sell them on your illustrations. Because I tell them, and one thing that was shocking to me, because I've illustrated all of my own books except for 2. And I tell people that it's one of the things that, like when it comes to illustrating books, a lot of times the illustrator and the writer never meet till the whole project is over, which I understand why they do it, because it's like, if you got one creative person that's got an idea of what the characters should look like, get another creative person that has ideas of what the characters should look like, if they're butting heads, it's never going to get done, But they kind of don't want one get in the way of the other. And but it's still strange because you're kind of like, a lot of times when the author and illustrator meet, a lot of times they're at a book festival signing books and they sit them together. And so it's interesting. It was a little bit of an eye-opening experience, but I tell everybody, it's different for everybody. The way it worked for me might not be the way it works for them. But first and foremost is just get your work out there. You got to be your own promoter. You got to you have to be the biggest advocate for your own work, for your own stories, and just try to be genuine with your work. And by genuine, what I mean genuine is this: it's if you love science fiction and stuff like that, that's great. You write about that, and if you're passionate about it, it'll show. It'll. That's what I mean by be genuine. If there's a genuine love for that particular genre, it's gonna be, when readers get it, they'll get it because you're kind of like taking them on a journey, as opposed to somebody just kind of going through the motions because he or she thinks that this is what people want to read. But if there's a genuine love for that particular story, I mean, it shines through.
So what made you specifically decide on writing children's books as opposed to adult books?
I guess the best way to describe it, I didn't know I was writing children's books. So somebody told me I was writing children's books, young adult books. And I'm a teacher. I've taught for 28 years. I'm getting close to the time where I'm going to retire. But I've taught junior high, for 28 years. So when I sat down to write, I would write the characters the way I would see my kids at school act. And I remember Lee Bird told me one time she used to be with Cinco Puntos Press, but he told me, he goes, you have a very keen understanding of the way the 13, 11, 12-year-old kid, thinks. And I thought to myself, well, yeah, because I've seen him. And I gave her this example. I used one of the Maximilian books. It's like junior high dance, 6th grade versus 8th grade. 8th grade dance, kids dance for the most part. They're dancing with each other. 6th grade dance, first real dance. Your music is playing. You got the boys on one side. You got the girls on the other. The girls want to dance. The boys are daring each other to go ask a girl to dance. And they're too young for some of the things that adults do to get courage. But so it's like, so eventually, they're daring each other so much that the girls get tired of waiting and start dancing with their friends there. And, but I tell you, so it's like, the things that they do is like one kid asked, and this really did happen. And I used it in my second Maximilian book. Kid asked the girl, 6th grader, asked a girl to the dance because everybody was telling he should ask her to the dance. And he did, 6th grade dance. And she said yes, she wanted to go to the 6th grade dance. And she was all excited. Then he realized something. he doesn't know how to dance. He has no idea how to dance. And there was only one person that could teach him. It was the last person he wanted to learn how to dance from. So it either had to be his mother or his sister. So he went with the sister. And as he put it, his sister told him, "You owe me big." So, so it's like little things like that, you see happen all the time with these kids, because one moment you're talking to them and you're almost tempted to think they're adults, becoming adults because they have like keen insight on all these ideas. The next moment you see them in the hall pushing and shoving each other, So it's like, it's a work in progress. So I try to, all my characters that's in the young adult books and the middle school books, I try to keep all the characters are a work in progress. They're still kind of discovering who they are, what they're about, trying to, things that are important to them seem silly to us. But at that time, at that age level, it was the single most important thing in the world.
Most of your books are both in English and Spanish. So what sparked that decision to write bilingual books?
Well, I'm a big advocate, a big believer that there is no disadvantage to a person having multiple languages. I can speak fluently and write fluently English and Spanish. Other people can do 3 languages, 4 languages, 5 languages. And to me, it's like that's always an advantage. Yes, I mean, yes, you should, if in the US, you should know English, but at the same time, there is no disadvantage to knowing multiple languages. Which is when I hear people complaining about that, I said, like, no, I just get up and learn another language. It's just it's just one of those deals where I never understand why people see it as something bad or a disadvantage. It's, to me, it's like when I hear people complaining about, well, that job, I need to know Spanish for that job. Well, you're going to be talking to a bunch of people that speak that's their main language. That's a job. It's called a job requirement. They're not gonna learn it till down the road. That's why you need to know it. And so to me, it's just one of those things that I've always been a believer in it. I've always been a believer in bilingual education, and Arte Público and Cinco Punto Press, are big advocates of bilingual books. And Lee and Low is the largest publisher of multicultural books. So they're we're all kind of like on the same wavelength when it comes to this idea.
So you're in 20 books. How do you tackle each project? Is your writing and illustrating process different or the same for each book?
Well, I tell people the story comes first. The story comes first. I used to make drawings of just random ideas, and some of them become books. But for the most part, the main idea is that you first have to come up with a story, and I tell people, and don't worry about the drawings, the illustrations, all that will come later. First, and I know kids sometimes when I do presentations at school, they ask me, "How long did it take you to write a book?" Well, some books, I tell them, you can write the book in a couple of weeks, a rough draft of it. Other books can take years. I told them Maximilian, the Mystery of the Guardian Angel, I worked on that book for 5 years, And once the second book came out and the third, it didn't take me that long because now I was familiar with the characters, but you're developing them, you're learning about them, you're trying to figure out, how they would react to different situations, and at the same time not lose track of, because sometimes you're writing a story and all of a sudden your character does something, you're like, hey, wait, hold on, Max would never react that way. That's not Max. So you have to go back and change it, to start to make sure you stay true to the root of that character. I approach him in the sense of, if it's a young adult book, I just pretty much just start keep writing the story throughout. If it's a picture book, I'll write the story, and then I'll go back in and break it into sections. I tell people most picture books are, there's 32 pages for the most part. It's picture, text, picture, text. So you kind of have to break it down that way. So that's really the only real difference. Now, once the story is done, and then I love working with editors. I tell people I work with Carmen Peña Obregón, Arte Público. I love working with Lee Bird and she was at Cinco Puntos. I tell people I learned how to write from working with Lee because she would go in and she would catch all the little. When you're writing a story, it's easy to kind of get so wrapped up in it. You miss all these little things, and she'd look at the manuscript and tell me, okay, this is good. Couple of points. You addressed this in chapter 3. Then you never went back and resolved it throughout the whole book. You go like, that's true. I never are you planning to use this in another book, or did you just forget? You probably go say, no, it's all part of the plan. No, I just forgot. So you go back in and they catch all the little mistakes. And then present to kids, I tell them, you give your manuscript to your editor, and he or she gives it back to you full of red marks all over the place and little notes, kind of like the way your English teacher does at school. I tell them, just remember, don't get mad, don't get offended. Your teacher's not marking up your paper because he or she is being mean to you. They're doing it to make you better. And ultimately, that's what they want. They want to make you be a better writer. And once the story is done, then I go back in and I reread it and I start working on illustrations. And when it comes to illustrations, I call it the comic book rule. Exaggerate everything. A character doesn't just throw a punch. His or her body completely twists. It was all a learning experience to me doing all these books because usually, and I tell kids, the illustrators also have editors. They have an art editor, and his or her job is to make your drawings be better. And they'll tell you, okay, I really love what you did here. I love this image here, but can you do the exact same image, but do it instead of doing it from this angle, do it from that angle, or do it from the up looking down, and then you start doing. And at first you're like, oh man, and after a while you go like, it does look better. It does look more dramatic. I love using colors. I use a lot of colors in my illustrations. I still use brushes on paper because I love this. I love getting. It's kind of like, I don't know if you all can see it here. There's a rough texture. I do it intentionally that way because I want it to be different from, I don't want it to look too polished. I want it to have a little bit of a rough texture to it. This one, La Llorona Can't Scare Me, which is my newest picture book. And I just have fun with it. I tell people, the drawing part is and coming up with the story is fun. And then you do the drawings. And I tell students sometimes, I'll do like 24 illustrations for that book. Those 24, there's about 32 illustrations total. That means that 6, 7, 8, 9 illustrations don't get used at all. And I tell them, usually it's the same image, but from a different angle. And this does happen. I tell them sometimes you'll do like you did the first drawing, then you do 2 or 3 other drawings from different angles. And then they say, you know what? Let's stick with the first one. You're like, but it's a lot of fun. It's a learning process. The whole thing is a learning process. So it's just something that I enjoy doing.
Most of your books contain traditional folklore aspects of Hispanic cultures. So how do you think that these figures contribute to the children reading your books?
Well, what I tell people when I talk about the legends and cucuis, we call them cucuis, in the books, I tell them that one of the things that they have to understand is that these stories are old. And especially to kids, I tell kids, these stories are so old that your great-grandfather was running around in diapers. And even by then, the stories were already old. And this is a story that your great-great-grandfather heard. He passed it down to your great-great-grandfather and your great-grandfather, and then your father and you. And guess what? one day you're going to tell this story to your kids. You might change it. You might modernize it a little bit. You might change it a bit, but, to make it more contemporary. But at its core, it's the same story that continues to be told. And I tell them, these are not just cuentos. They're not just cucuys. They are a little bit of who we are, of where we come from. And in that sense, we keep passing these stories on, which I said earlier. They're like precious stones that you pass them on to the next generation, and everybody adds to it and passes it on. And I did a series. I don't think I have any images of them here, where I did it. They called them Cucuys in Space, where I had like La Llorona, the devil at the dance. They're all like wearing like space suits and stuff. They're out in space, because the idea being was that these stories are eternal. They'll defy gravity and go to other regions, other galaxies, other places, and basically continue to be told. I give them the example of El Chupacabras. I tell them, people think that El Chupacabras is a relatively new legend. It's actually a very old story from that had been around in Puerto Rico for a very long time. But then the internet came. When the internet came, somebody published the story, wrote the story on the internet. And that story went all over the place. Next thing you knew, they were in a case of unsolved mysteries, and everybody was seeing the chupacabras in their backyard. Even in the X-Files, they had an episode that dealt with the chupacabras, as Mulder called it. So there was like all this, like I told them, the chupacabra was the first cucuy to benefit from the internet, and it's a big. That's how a lot of it. It's a whole spreading the story by way of mouth, but using all this electronic media that's available.
What is your favorite illustration that you've created?
Probably my favorite illustrations are from the book Shadow Close and the Tejas Kid, just because it's such a personal book. I had a lot of fun with it, just making the characters look like me and my son, and so that's the illustrations from the Shadow Close and the Tejas Kid. And also one of the things that I love about it is that just the costumes and my son actually, we did make a makeshift Tejas Kid costume for my little boy at the time, and took pictures of him modeling. In the book, The Great and Mighty Nico, the kid that's jumping on the bed, that's him wearing a wrestling mask. And I took photographs of him, and I told him, jump on the bed. And he said, are you sure? Mom's not here. Don't worry about it. Just jump on the bed. And I took pictures of him jumping on the bed, and I ended up using them in the book. Of course, now he's 18, and he don't look like a little boy anymore. He's like 6'2",
And did you have any role models growing up who were also artists?
Yeah, well, growing up, I would say when it came to like artists whose work I loved, I always loved the work of people like Cesar Martinez, Luis Jimenez. I love Carmen Loma's work, because Carmen Lomas, she's a storyteller. She tells stories through her art. And she had a series of books that she did with Children's Book Press, Pedacitos de mi Corazón, Little Pieces of My Heart, which was basically her paintings with a little brief summary that kind of explained what the painting was about, which is, but what I thought was so brilliant about that was that it was, okay, they had one that was a posada, a traditional Mexican Christmas celebration. And then there was just a brief sonnet that kind of told a little bit about it. And so that way, when people experience it, it's not so strange to them, because they know what's going on now. They get it, which is kind of like what I wanted to do with art. Now, as far as writers, I grew up loving the work of Sandra Cisneros. My favorite writer is Denise Chavez. I think she is just amazing. I've read her Loving Pedro Infante, her Last of the Menu Girls. My introduction to her was a story called La Wedding, Puss and Daughters of the Fifth Son. And that was such a hilarious story. I couldn't stop laughing when I read it. It's like everything that could go better at a wedding does. And one thing that I thought was so funny is the way she could capture people. Like people are coming in to the wedding, that relatives haven't seen each other in years. Oh my goodness, how you doing? Hugs, kisses, whole thing. And of course, the minute they go their separate ways, my God, can you believe how fat he has gotten? It's like this whole for that moment, everything's wonderful. But then the minute they go their separate ways, the criticism, the chisme starts and all this stuff. But those are some of my biggest influences as far as with work, the writers and artists.
Do you remember attempt at illustrating or writing that you did as a kid?
I tell people when I was a kid, my first canvases were brown paper bags and crayons. I tell people, kids especially, I tell kids, once upon a time when you went to the local grocery store, they gave you a thing called a paper bag. And they're like, oh. And they were more light brown in color, and you would get crayons. And after your mom would put away all the groceries, she would put the paper bags there. I would get them and I would just draw on them. I would draw what I saw on TV. I would Speedy Gonzalez, Road Runners, Bugs Bunnies, Batman, Superman, Spider-Man, different drawing on this paper bags. And my dad, bless his heart, he never complained. When he took his lunch, his bag was completely covered with every superhero you could imagine. And I'm sure he got grief about it at work, but he was always like, oh, my son drew this, my son drew that, And so, but yeah, that was my first experience as far as doing art as a kid.
And do you have any advice for any teen or young adult that would like to pursue a career as an author or an illustrator?
My first thing would be to tell them first is to read. Read. If the person wants to be a writer, read. Read as much as you can. Big books, magazines, comic books. Just expose yourself to as many different mediums, many genres that are out there. Because when you're young, you're going through a discovery process where you're trying to figure out what kind of genre, what kind of books do I like to read, to write about, and expose yourself to as many different authors as you can, because this is when you're learning, and what's going to happen. And I tell students, this is what's going to happen. It happens with with everybody. You sit down to write or to draw. And a lot of times you're going to try to write or draw like your favorite author or illustrator, whoever that person might be. Because that's the way kind of like everybody kind of starts, trying to be like somebody else. But then something happens, and I tell them, you won't notice it till after it's already happened. That's when you realize, like, wait a minute, this is not writing like so-and-so. This is different. This is me. That's when you've discovered your voice, your style, your way of telling a story. And once you find that, then you just work on developing it. Because you're gonna grow, you're gonna get better and better. The way you write when you're in sixth grade is not the way you're gonna write when you're in eighth grade, which is not the way you're gonna write when you're a freshman in high school, or when you graduate high school, or when you're in college. Because it's a work in progress, and you're developing, you're learning more. You're being exposed to all these different writers, all these different ideas, all these different techniques. And, and I tell them the way I would approach it is it's a journey, and it never ends, because I tell people the minute you start to think that, oh, I'm the best at this, the minute you start thinking that way, then it's over, because you're not going to get any better, because you don't think that you can. Which is sad, because then you're kind of like you're stopping your own growth, which is not what you want to do. If you're an artist, whether writer, artist, anything to do with the arts, you want to keep learning, you want to keep developing, you want to keep exploring the way you write now, the way you draw now. You don't want it to be exactly the same in 10 years from now, because you grow and you experience more, and you see more, and you learn more. And everything that you experience and learn, you bring it in with you, and it becomes part of what you write.
What is your favorite color?
My favorite color, actually, I like black and blue. Why black? I don't know. I've always liked. I tell them I grew up being a big Batman fan, and maybe that has something to do with it. Because I even tell kids, when it comes to like drawing and coloring, especially with coloring, I tell them, look at the books. In Batman books, they always go for this darker, grimmer colors. As opposed to a Superman book, you got all this bright, skylight scenes and all this stuff. So it's different. It's the colors will set the mood for the story as much as the drawings will.
When are you happiest?
Honestly, when I'm spending time with my family, my son, and my wife. I tell my people that my son is like, he's 18. He's at that age where he's going to be taking off on his own, and so so I'm trying to, hold on to it, as much of it for now, because eventually, he's gonna go off and do his own way. He's an artist too. He's not an artist in the sense like he can write, but it's not something that he does all the time. He can draw, but it's not something that he does all the time. What he can do, he can play music. He can play the piano, the keyboard, the saxophone, the violin, and he can compose his own music. And he's and I can see it when he's doing that stuff. That's when he's at his happiest. And I think you're at your happiest when you're doing something that you love, something that you're passionate about. And and it's great to see him have found something that just that when you're done, you're a little tired, you're a little exhausted, but you have this feeling like you feel good. You're creating something, and that's his outlet. Because I always tell people, every person should have some form of creative outlet, because that's it. It's good for your development, your mental health, and just express. Because we all have ideas, and sometimes people need to find a way to just put them on paper or something that they can bring it out.
If you could have 3 people out of all the people in the whole universe that are dead or alive over to dinner, who would they be and why?
Oh, I would have to say, that's a good question. It's like when you started saying that, a bunch of stuff just popped in my head. I would love to talk Bob Kane. He created Batman, just to look at his thought process. And I know that he borrowed a lot from Zorro when creating Batman, and there's other stuff. And he had help from other people that he didn't, like Stan Lee, didn't quite give credit to, but now they do get credit. I would say someone like Prince would be cool, because I just thought he was so creative. He was so incredibly talented. And the person he was when he did his first album when he was 16, 17, versus the music he was making, toward the end of his life, it just showed a complete growth as an artist. And that he just and he was an artist. It was all about just the music, and he didn't want to just keep repeating himself. He wanted to create something that was different, something new. I would also say Americo Paredes. I never got to meet him before he passed away, but people like him and Gloria Saldúa and Jovita Gonzalez, all these people, I tell people, we can write books today. We can be authors because of what people like Americo Paredes, Jovita Gonzalez, Gloria Saldúa, Rolando Hinojosa Smith, because of what these people did. That they opened doors and broke glass ceilings. And Americo Paredes, the first Hispanic scholar, got his degree when there were a lot of things that were in his way to keep him from getting that. And so I think those would be the kind of people that I would like to meet, just because there was a whole creative process in the way they did things.
What is a book that you have recently
read that I would say, and this is a shout out to my good friend David Bowles. We used to teach at the same junior high together. They call me Güero. That is such an amazing book. I got to read the manuscript before it was a book, and because he had gotten the contract for it with Cinco Punto Press, and when I read it, because he sent it to me, and I loaded on my laptop, and I read it. I sent it back. Man, this thing is going to win stuff, and I was like, I just didn't know how much stuff it was going to win, But yeah, he was. And it was a great story. And I told him it was just like, I read this, I could relate to the character. I could relate to the characters in the book. It was very genuinely done in the way he wrote it. So that another writer whose books I love is Guadalupe Garcia McCall. I mean, she's an amazing writer, and she's what makes her really unique is that she is as genuine as her books. What you see is what you get, and each and every character in her stories is an extension of her. You know, there's a genuine love in every character that she makes. As far as storytellers, Joe Hayes. I grew up loving Joe Hayes and tell his stories. La Llorona, the bubblegum chewing rattler, the lovesick skunk who falls in love with a shoe that smells so bad he thinks it's a skunk. But he has just this passion for when he speaks, and the way he goes from English to Spanish so effortlessly when he's telling his cuentos. And I tell people he's on YouTube. You can type in Joe Hayes and you'll get some of his stories. And he's amazing. I mean, those three people, Bowles, Guadalupe, and Joe Hayes, they're two people whose books, whose work I just love. I think they're amazing, all of them.
Thank you so much, Javier, for taking the time out of your day to talk with us. We learned a lot about you. Can you let everyone at home know about any upcoming projects and where they could connect with you?
As far as social media, if people need to email me, it's real simple. The way it's there, with an X, Xavier Garza at hotmail.com. It's really that simple. And Twitter, I'm at Charro Close. That's me. Charro Close is me. And it can message me also there. As far as book projects, I have the fifth in the Vincent Ventura Monster Fighter Extraordinaire series coming out in a few months. It's called Vincent Ventura and the Mystery of the Dancing Devil, which deals with the devil at the dance story. And of course, how do you do battle with the devil? The only type of battle that would make sense with the devil is to have, with the dancing devil, is to have a dance-off. And which happens in the story. There is a dance-off. I do have a couple of other projects that I'm working on. One of them is this will be my fourth collection of scary stories. It's called Chupacabras USA and Other Stories, and it features literally a Chupacabra story. And there's also La Llorona Wants You, and I Fly at Night. And there's like 10 new scary stories. I'm also doing a follow-up of sorts to the Maximilian series called, this one is actually called, based on the Guardian Angel, the comic books, because in the book I mentioned that he made comic books, and it's called Lucha Libre Heroes versus Lucha Libre Zombies. And it literally features, I have one here, of where the heroes come back and they're doing battle against Lucha Libre Zombies that return, here's a good one, from the dead. And the vilest of the vile Lucha Libre villains return. And of course, the Guardian Angel and the young Lucha Libre heroes have to do battle against them. And the other project that I'm working on, which is a work in progress, it's a Lucha Libre book for the really young kids called Little Luchadores and Little Luchadoras, in which little kids are wrestling. And of course, what do little luchadores dream about when they go to bed? They dream of one day becoming big luchadores. And those are the ones that I'm working on right now. The one that's going to be coming out the soonest is got a date of May 31st, but probably sooner than that, is the Vincent Ventura and the Mystery of the Dancing Devil, which will be the fifth. I have 7 books that I'm doing in that series. And so this will be the 5th, which is hard to believe it's already at number 5, but it's been 5 years since I introduced Vincent Ventura Monster Fighter Extraordinaire.
Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me, guys. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you. And Javier, I wanted to mention, I was actually born in San Antonio, so
Oh, really?
I'm a Tejas kid too.
Oh, cool. Very cool.
Yes. And also I'm the teen librarian here. So I appreciate what you said about how comic books taught you how to read. And I am so thankful to hear all of your expertise working with young adults. And yes, thank you so much for being with us today. It was really awesome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.